A lot of people will drive 20 minutes to save $6 on gas, refuse to buy a decent office chair, skip the dental cleaning, keep using a laptop that freezes every time they open two tabs, and then wonder why life feels harder, slower, and more expensive than it should. That is not financial discipline. That is not strategic frugality. A lot of the time, that is just cheapness wearing the costume of responsibility. And cheapness can get very expensive. There is a certain kind of person who feels virtuous every time they spend less money, no matter what they are spending less money on. They will choose the lower quality thing, the slower option, the deferred repair, the uncomfortable solution, the version that saves money today, even if it quietly creates a bigger bill tomorrow. Then they will tell themselves they are being smart, careful, grounded, practical. Sometimes they are. A lot of the time, they are just making life more inefficient, more fragile, and more expensive in delayed ways that never get properly connected back to the original saving. That is what I want to talk about today. Not luxury, not overspending, not the obvious ways people light money on fire. I want to talk about the hidden financial damage caused by being cheap in the wrong places, and why so many people who think they are protecting their money are actually training their lives to leak more time, more energy, and more cash over the long run. Nick here, and this matters because the cheapest option is not always the lowest cost option. In fact, one of the most common ways people stay financially stuck is by obsessing over visible small savings while casually accepting much bigger invisible losses. They save $10 and lose $100. They protect the receipt and ignore the system. The first misunderstanding: cheap is not the same as efficient. This is where almost all of the confusion starts. People think that paying less means spending less. Sometimes it does, but not always. If you buy the cheaper thing and it breaks faster, costs more to maintain, wastes your time, lowers your output, hurts your health, or forces you to replace it twice, then you did not spend less. You just split the cost into a format that felt emotionally easier in the moment. That is a very different thing. The human brain loves immediate visible savings. That little thrill of, I got the cheaper option, is incredibly persuasive, even when the decision makes no economic sense after the first week. A $15 shirt feels better than a $40 shirt. An old unstable car with no payment feels better than a reliable one if you only focus on this month. Skipping preventative care feels cheaper than dealing with it now. Buying the flimsy version of something feels like a win until it starts failing right on schedule and you discover you have been participating in a subscription model for low-quality life. That is the trap. People tend to compare upfront price because upfront price is clean. It is simple. It gives you a tidy little number. But a lot of real financial life is not decided by upfront price. It is decided by total cost, replacement frequency, time drain, stress load, and what the choice does to the rest of the system. That is why cheapness is so deceptive. It gives you the emotional reward immediately and sends the actual invoice later. The shoe example explains almost everything. There is a famous line people repeat about boots and poverty, but you do not even need the quote to understand the point. Imagine two people buy shoes. One spends $30 on a pair that wears out in 6 months, hurts their feet, and starts coming apart right when the weather gets annoying. The other spends $120 on a pair that lasts 3 years, feels better, and does not need to be replaced every time the calendar gets ambitious. The first person feels frugal in the moment. They spent less. They protected cash. They got out of the store with less damage to the checking account. But over 3 years, they may spend $180 replacing the cheap pair again and again. And that is before you add in discomfort, wasted shopping time, the probability that they have to rebuy in a rush, and the fact that low-quality things always seem to fail when you are already tired and have somewhere to be. The expensive pair looked costly. The cheap pair was costly. That distinction matters. And once you understand it, you start seeing the same pattern everywhere. The second misunderstanding: people love saving money on things that barely matter. One of the strangest habits in personal finance is how much energy people devote to small tactical savings while neglecting large structural costs. They will spend 40 minutes researching how to save $7 on a household purchase, then casually renew a terrible insurance policy, stay on a phone plan that makes no sense, keep the car payment that is eating their future, or refuse to negotiate income because that conversation feels uncomfortable. This is incredibly common. It is also deeply irrational, because not all dollars are equally worth chasing. A dollar saved on toothpaste counts, yes. But a dollar saved on something tiny is not automatically more valuable than the hour of life you burned to find it. And if that hour came from time you could have used to improve your earning capacity, fix a bigger financial leak, or simply preserve enough sanity to not spend $30 later out of exhaustion, the savings start looking suspicious. A lot of cheap people are not actually optimized. They are just hyper-alert to visible purchases and strangely numb to the giant financial doors hanging off their hinges. This is how people stay financially busy without becoming financially strong. They are working hard at the wrong scale. The expensive cost of low-quality tools. Now let's move into one of the most underappreciated categories in adult life. The things that help you function. Your mattress, your chair, your laptop, your phone, your work setup, your kitchen tools, your daily use items, your transportation. The boring objects that shape your output, your mood, your energy, and your ability to move through the day without feeling like your life is assembled from discounted inconvenience. Cheapness in this category is brutal because the cost does not show up in one clean number. It shows up as friction. The laptop crashes, so tasks take longer. The chair hurts your back, so your workday gets worse. The mattress ruins your sleep, so your focus gets weaker. The low-quality kitchen setup nudges you toward takeout because cooking turns into a clumsy little punishment. The car is unreliable, so your whole week gets built around low-level uncertainty. None of those things announce themselves as financial mistakes in the moment. They just quietly make you less effective, less rested, more reactive, and more likely to solve your resulting fatigue with expensive convenience. That is why cheapness can be such a bad deal. It does not always cost you directly. Sometimes it just makes you worse at life, which then costs money in 1,000 scattered ways. The math of a fake bargain. Let's use a simple example. Imagine someone buys a $400 laptop because spending $1,100 on a good one feels excessive. Fair enough. That sounds responsible. That sounds like restraint. But the cheap laptop is slow, unreliable, and annoying enough that it steals 20 minutes a day in lag, restarting, freezing, and just generally behaving like it resents being alive. 20 minutes a day over 5 workdays is 100 minutes a week. Over 50 weeks, that is 5,000 minutes a year. That is more than 83 hours. 83 hours. That is over 2 full work weeks of time lost because the cheaper tool made ordinary tasks more painful. Now attach even a modest value to that time. Say your time is worth only $20 an hour. That is already over $1,600 in lost value in 1 year, and the machine still needs replacing sooner. So what exactly did the person save? Not much. They just converted visible spending into invisible waste. That move feels financially humble in the moment. Over time, it is often ridiculous, where cheapness turns into future repairs. Cheapness becomes especially dangerous around maintenance. This is where people talk themselves into some of the most expensive sentences in adult life. It can wait. It's not that bad. I'll deal with it next month. I don't need to replace it yet. It still technically works. That logic destroys money. Because small repairs are one thing. Big repairs are usually just small repairs that got tired of being ignored. A minor car issue becomes a larger one. A plumbing problem becomes wall damage. A cavity becomes a very expensive moral lesson. A cheap appliance becomes a recurring problem plus a replacement. This pattern is so common that it barely even registers as a pattern anymore. People simply accept that things are expensive, while forgetting how many of those expensive things were cheaper earlier but lost the chance. This is why being cheap is not the same as being careful. Careful people protect systems. Cheap people often postpone costs until the cost gets offended and doubles. The social version of cheapness is just as bad. There is another version of this that people do not like to admit. Sometimes being cheap in the wrong place is not about objects. It is about relationships and social presence. Now, this does not mean spend wildly to impress people. Obviously not. If your social strategy depends on buying status every weekend, that is a different problem entirely. But there are moments where spending a little more protects something that matters. Paying for a reasonable gift instead of the weird, thoughtless panic item. Showing up properly prepared for an interview, a meeting, a wedding, a meaningful event. Replacing the one thing that is making you look or feel visibly under-resourced in places where appearance changes opportunity. Again, this is not about vanity. It is about understanding that some forms of spending are not consumption. They are participation, functionality, or credibility. The cheap person often collapses all spending into one moral category: bad. The strategic person understands that some spending removes friction, protects health, signals seriousness, saves time, or preserves an opportunity that is worth far more than the cost itself. That distinction changes lives. The income side almost nobody connects. Here is where this gets really painful. A lot of cheapness is not just reducing comfort. It is reducing earning power. If you refuse to spend on skill growth, useful software, better tools, better transportation, childcare that gives you real bandwidth, or anything else that would increase your capacity to work, focus, or move faster, your frugality may be strangling the exact things that create upward movement. This happens constantly. People refuse a $700 course that could realistically improve their income trajectory because the upfront cost feels painful. They avoid paying for software that would save hours every week. They stick with slow, broken systems because it still works. They pass on networking, conferences, coaching, certifications, or strategic experiences because spending on yourself feels indulgent, even when the return could be real. Then they remain in the same income bracket for years and call it discipline. That is not discipline. That is fear of spending masquerading as prudence. And it can keep someone financially small far longer than a few overpriced dinners ever could. A tale of two responsible people. Picture two people earning the same income. Same city. Same rough expenses. Same intelligence. Same general desire to get ahead. Person A is cheap in a moralistic way. They hate spending money on almost everything. They buy the lowest cost version by default. They delay maintenance. They avoid paying for convenience, even when it would save serious time. They refuse to spend on tools, skills, or quality because they are proud of keeping costs down. Person B is selective. They cut hard on low-value spending, but they are willing to pay for things that reduce friction, protect health, increase reliability, or improve earning power. They buy fewer things, but better ones. They maintain what matters. They pay for efficiency where it compounds. 3 years later, Person A often feels like they are working harder. They are dealing with more minor crises, more replacements, more drag, and more invisible fatigue. Person B does not necessarily look flashy, but their life runs better. Their systems are stronger. Their time is cleaner. Their stress is lower. Their financial decisions have more leverage. The first person thinks they are better at money because they spent less in isolated moments. The second person is usually getting better results. That difference matters more than almost anything in this whole conversation. Why the cheap identity is so emotionally sticky. Cheapness survives because it gives people a moral identity. It lets them feel disciplined, serious, better than the spenders, immune to waste, financially superior in a world full of people acting ridiculous. And sometimes that feeling is deserved. But the identity can become addictive. Once someone starts getting emotional credit from, "I am the person who always spends less," they stop evaluating whether the decision is actually intelligent. They just want the emotional reward of not paying the higher number. That means they will choose low quality over durability, inconvenience over efficiency, delay over prevention, price over value, visible thrift over invisible strength. And when this becomes part of identity, people defend obviously bad decisions with almost religious intensity. They do not want to hear that the cheaper thing costs more, because then they lose the self-image that came with choosing it. That is why this conversation is uncomfortable. It is not just about money. It is about ego, the categories where cheapness usually backfires hardest. If you want the fast version, these are the places where extreme cheapness most often turns stupid. Health. Skipping preventative care, dental work, rest, decent food, or anything that keeps your body functional is almost always a bad long-term deal. Tools and equipment. Anything you use constantly should be judged by durability, effectiveness, and time savings, not just price. Transportation. An unreliable car can destroy schedules, income, emotional stability, and repair budgets all at once. Education and skill growth. Being too cheap to improve your earning capacity is one of the most expensive habits people protect. Core daily life systems. Beds, shoes, work setup, kitchen tools, insurance, and the boring things that decide whether daily life runs smoothly or like a badly funded field experiment. Notice what is not on that list. Random symbolic luxury. Mindless lifestyle upgrades. Showing off. Status purchases. This is not an excuse to spend emotionally and call it investing in quality. That is a different trap. The point is not to spend more. The point is to spend smarter. What actual frugality looks like. Real frugality is not compulsively choosing the smaller price. Real frugality is making decisions that lower total cost over time. That means cutting ruthlessly where value is fake, spending intentionally where value compounds, and being mature enough to tell the difference. Real frugality is saying no to the expensive restaurant you do not care about, but yes to the tool that saves 5 hours a week. It is skipping the trend purchase, but paying to fix the problem while it is still small. It is driving a modest car, but keeping it reliable. It is avoiding waste, not worshiping discomfort. That last distinction matters. A lot of people are not actually trying to reduce waste. They are just addicted to the feeling of deprivation because it makes them feel responsible. But unnecessary deprivation is not a wealth strategy. It is just a slower, more self-righteous form of inefficiency. The question that changes the whole decision. Here is the question that makes this easier. Is this actually cheaper, or does it just cost less today? That is it. That one question exposes an enormous amount of fake frugality. Does it actually save money, or does it shift the cost forward? Does it reduce total expense, or does it increase future hassle? Does it preserve cash intelligently, or does it starve the system in a place that will retaliate? If more people asked that question, half of their responsible decisions would suddenly look suspicious. And that is useful, because the goal is not to be proud of spending less in isolated moments. The goal is to build a life that works better, costs less over the long run, and does not keep producing avoidable problems because you are trying to win every transaction instead of fixing the whole machine. The closing thought that matters. A lot of people are not poor because they spend too much on luxury. They are poor because they save money in ways that quietly make life more expensive. They underbuy. They postpone. They patch. They tolerate low-quality friction. They reject useful spending. They protect the feeling of thrift while letting larger costs spread quietly through time, stress, repairs, and lost capacity. That is the real trap, because a cheap life can look responsible on paper while functioning terribly in practice. And if it functions terribly, it is probably more expensive than it looks. The goal is not to spend freely. The goal is not to spend fearfully. The goal is to stop making decisions that look disciplined at the register but create a more fragile, slower, more expensive life afterward. Because the financially strong person is not the one who always picks the lowest number. It is the one who understands the difference between price and cost.